Theodore Whitfield was 38 years old, and until that Thursday morning, he thought he understood exactly what he was losing. An architect who built his career from nothing, married to a woman who'd grown to see him as beneath her. Diane never knew his father owned half the developments she walked past every week. She just knew he drove an old truck, wore the same jacket for years, and never talked about money, so she assumed there wasn't any. That morning, she sat across the courtroom in a $3,000 suit, whispering to her mother, smiling the smile of a woman who'd already spent the settlement in her head. She'd asked for everything: the house, the accounts, even his future earnings. She laughed softly when she looked at him, certain he had nothing left to lose. Then the judge looked up from the paperwork, paused, and asked one question Diane never saw coming. And the moment she answered it, everything she thought she'd won began to unravel. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The blueprints were spread across Ted's desk like a map of somewhere quiet. He had 3 of them pinned flat under a coffee mug and a brass compass his father had given him years ago. The desk lamp threw a warm circle of yellow light across the paper. Outside the office window, the neighborhood was dark and still. It was almost 11. Ted traced a wall with his finger. He was checking the load-bearing calculations for a community library project. A small job by most standards, but the kind he liked. Clean lines, real purpose. A building that would matter to ordinary people, not just the client who paid for it. That was how he worked. Careful, patient, always checking the numbers twice. His firm, Whitfield Design, had 5 employees. They were good people. They worked out of a converted row house 2 miles from where he sat, and they took jobs that interested them rather than just jobs that paid the most. They had built a small but honest reputation over 7 years. Ted had not advertised once. Every client had come through a referral. He was proud of that. He was not the kind of man who talked about himself at parties. From down the hall came the click and hiss of the bathroom, the sharp smell of perfume drifting through the gap under the door. Diane was getting ready. "Co-workers," she had said at dinner, barely looking up from her phone. "Amanda's birthday. We're going to that wine bar on Clement." Ted had nodded. He hadn't asked which Amanda. He heard the closet open, heard the heel of a shoe knock against the floor. Then her voice, louder than necessary, as if she were speaking to the room rather than to him. "I don't know when I'll be back. Don't wait up." "Okay," he said. The word just sat there in the air between them. It had not always been like this. Ted remembered a version of Diane that laughed easily, at her own jokes, at bad movies, at the way he always burned the first pancake on Sunday mornings. That had been the first 2 years. Maybe 3. The distance had come in slowly, the way cold comes into a house when a window seal breaks. You don't feel it all at once. You just notice one morning that something is off, that the warmth you counted on isn't quite there anymore. Her contempt for his work had come in the same way, slowly, then all at once. At her company gala 2 springs ago, she had introduced him to her regional director with a short, flat smile. "This is my husband. He does architecture, small residential stuff." Then she had turned back to her director and laughed at something that had nothing to do with Ted. He had stood there holding a glass of water, wearing his one good blazer, and said nothing. The comments about his father had been worse. Otis Whitfield drove a 12-year-old truck. He wore work boots and flannel shirts and kept his fingernails short from a lifetime of using his hands. When he visited, he fixed things around the house without being asked. A sticking door, a slow drain, because that was how he showed love. Ted had grown up watching him do the same thing, and he had always found it beautiful. Diane found it embarrassing. "Your handyman dad is coming this weekend," she had said once, not even trying to soften it. "Can you at least ask him not to wear that jacket to dinner?" Ted had not answered that one either. She left at 10:45. He heard the front door shut, heard her heels on the porch steps, heard the car door close with that solid, expensive sound. He went back to his blueprints. 20 minutes later, he got up to look for the revised survey copy he needed for tomorrow's client meeting. He had left it somewhere near the front entryway. He was almost sure of it. He checked the small table by the door, checked the coat closet shelf. That was when he reached into the pocket of Diane's winter coat, still hanging there, the gray one she never wore anymore, looking for a folded document she sometimes moved without thinking. He did not find the survey. His fingers closed around a folded piece of paper instead. He pulled it out. It was a bank statement, not from any account he recognized. The account holder's name was listed simply as D.A. Combs, Diane's maiden name, middle initial. An account she had never mentioned, an account he had never seen. He stood very still in the hallway. The statement showed a single transaction, a transfer out. The date was 6 weeks ago. The number was $47,000. Ted looked at it for a long time. He was a man who worked with numbers every day. He understood load and weight, and what happened when the structure beneath something could not hold what was being placed on top of it. He understood exactly what he was looking at. He folded the statement carefully and held it in his hand. Then he heard it. The quiet crunch of gravel outside, and the sweep of headlights across the front window as Diane's car turned into the driveway. Ted moved fast. He heard the car engine cut off, and he folded the statement once, clean and tight, and slid it into the back pocket of his jeans. By the time the front door opened, he was back in his office. He had his pencil in his hand. He was looking at the blueprints. "You're still up," Diane said. Not a question. More like mild annoyance. "Just finishing something." He looked up at her with the same calm face he always wore. "Good night?" "Fine." She set her purse on the entryway table and didn't look at him again. "Amanda drank too much. I ended up driving her home." "That was nice of you." She made a small sound, something between agreement and dismissal, and disappeared down the hall. Ted turned back to the blueprints. He did not sleep well that night, but he didn't say a word. He gave himself 2 days before he did anything. That was discipline. That was the part of him that had learned, from years of working through structural problems, that the first thing you feel when something's wrong is almost never useful. Panic makes you move too fast. Moving too fast makes you sloppy. And he could not afford to be sloppy. On the second day, he sat at his desk at Whitfield Design and ran a quiet search on the account number from the statement. It took less than an hour to trace through a business registration tied to the account. The name D.A. Combs came back, connected to a rental agreement. A storage facility, about 6 miles from their house. Unit 114, rented 8 months ago. Ted sat with that for a moment. 8 months ago, Diane had told him she was clearing out her old office supplies and needed somewhere to put boxes temporarily. He had not asked about it since. He had no reason to. He had every reason now. On Saturday, he told Diane he needed to make a run to the hardware store. She was on the couch with a face mask on and her phone in her hand, and she didn't even look up. The storage facility was called Secure Plus. It sat between a tire shop and a dry cleaner off a wide gray commercial road. The gate code was written in small pencil numbers on the back of the statement. Diane always wrote codes somewhere physical. He had guessed she would. He was right. Unit 114 was in the second row, orange rolling door, standard padlock. The combination was her mother's birthday, the same 4 digits Diane used for everything. He had known that number for 11 years. He lifted the door. He stood in the entrance for a moment and just looked. Boxes, 8 or 9 of them, stacked neatly. A garment bag hanging from a hook on the side wall. Bags from stores he recognized, brands she had never brought home. Brands that cost more than a week of his salary per item, all with the tags still on. But it was the filing boxes that held him. There were 2 of them. Brown, labeled in Diane's neat handwriting. He opened the first one. Insurance documents, their mortgage records, a copy of their joint tax return from 3 years ago, copies of his pay stubs, his, specifically, going back almost 2 years. He opened the second box. On top was a business card, clean white cardstock with a dark gray font, Renner and Holt Family Law, Kathleen Holt, partner. Below it, a yellow sticky note in Diane's handwriting, KH, confirm filing timeline. Beneath the card was a manila folder. Inside that folder was a document, roughly 12 pages, stapled in the top left corner. He turned to the first page. In re the marriage of Theodore J. Whitfield and Diane A. Whitfield, petition for dissolution of marriage. The date at the top of the page was 7 weeks ago. He read the first 3 pages slowly, the way he read everything. Then he put it back exactly as he found it. He put the folder back. He put the lid on the box. On the floor near the back wall, he noticed a small black phone charger, the kind for an older model, not one he owned. And next to it, wedged behind one of the shopping bags, a glass bottle of cologne. Dark blue glass, silver cap. He picked it up, turned it over, put it back. Not his. That night after dinner, Diane went to take a bath and left the shared family tablet on the kitchen counter. Ted wasn't snooping. He was looking for the grocery list app they both used. He saw the notification on the lock screen before it faded. A text. The sender was saved simply as B. Miss you already. Tonight was everything. Ted set the tablet back down on the counter. He straightened it so the corner lined up with the edge of the tile. Then he walked to his office and closed the door behind him. He sat down in his chair. He looked at the far wall for a long moment. The framed blueprints, the shelf of architecture books, the brass compass his father had given him. Then he picked up his phone and called Otis. His father answered on the second ring. Ted. His voice was low and even, the same voice it had always been, like gravel that had been worn smooth. Dad? Ted kept his own voice steady. I need to ask you something specific, about the company, about how it's structured. He paused. How much of Whitfield Holdings is actually in my name? Legally? A short silence. Why are you asking me that? Otis said. Careful, measuring. Because I need to know before I do anything else. Another pause. Longer this time. Ted could hear the faint sound of a television in the background at his father's house, and then the sound of it going quiet. Sit tight, Otis said. Don't do anything rash. Don't say a word to her. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it now, a sharpening. I'll handle my end quietly. You just stay steady. Okay, Ted said. The word was the same one he had used with Diane 2 nights ago, but this time it meant something completely different. The courtroom smelled like old wood and recycled air. Ted sat at the respondent's table with his hands folded in front of him and his back straight. His suit was dark navy, simple cut, no tie clip. His attorney, a compact, precise woman named Vera Stills, had a legal pad in front of her and a pen she hadn't uncapped yet. Ted had not slept much the night before, but you wouldn't know it by looking at him. Diane arrived 7 minutes before the session began. Ted heard the doors before he turned. He heard the click of heels, sharp, deliberate, and the softer shuffle of a second pair behind them. He turned just enough to see. Diane wore a cream-colored blazer over a dark blouse, tailored trousers, heels that probably cost more than the monthly utility bill on their house. Her hair was done. Her jewelry was understated in the way that expensive things often are. She looked like a woman who had already won something and was just here to collect it. Patricia walked half a step behind her. Diane's mother was wearing a charcoal suit and small pearl earrings, her silver hair perfectly set. She scanned the courtroom with the calm, approving eyes of someone attending a graduation. Diane sat at the petitioner's table without looking at Ted. Patricia settled into the gallery directly behind her daughter, close enough to lean forward and whisper. Ted turned back to the front of the room. Diane's attorney was a man named Gerald Peck. He had silver hair, a very good watch, and the practiced confidence of a man who charged by the quarter hour. When Judge Castellano entered and the room stood, Peck buttoned his jacket with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He probably had. The session opened. Peck was on his feet almost immediately. "Your Honor," he began, voice smooth and full, "my client is seeking a fair and equitable resolution to a 12-year marriage. The requested settlement includes the marital home, the joint retirement accounts, and a percentage of ongoing earnings from the respondent's architecture firm, Whitfield Design." He let each item land like it was reasonable, like it was obvious. The respondent has no significant assets to speak of beyond the firm, which was built during the course of the marriage. My client's contributions, both financial and personal, have been substantial. Ted looked straight ahead. Behind Diane, Patricia leaned forward and murmured something low. Diane pressed her lips together to suppress a smile. Vera Stills wrote something on her pad. Ted glanced at it. Let them talk. He agreed. Judge Castellano had the kind of face that gave nothing away. She was in her late 50s, dark-haired going silver at the temples, with reading glasses she wore low on her nose. She had barely looked up from the documents in front of her while Peck spoke. She was looking at them now. Her eyes moved slowly across the financial disclosure packet. One page. Another. She turned back. Stopped. Her finger moved to a specific line and stayed there. Peck was still speaking, something about the retirement account valuation, but the judge had gone still in a way that made Ted's attorney look up. Judge Castellano removed her glasses. "Mr. Peck," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I'm going to stop you there for a moment." Peck paused mid-sentence. "Of course, Your Honor." The judge's eyes moved across the room to the petitioner's table. Not to Peck, to Diane. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, "I have a question for you directly." Diane straightened slightly, the smile not quite gone from her face. "Yes?" Judge Castellano looked back down at the page in front of her, then back up. "Who is your husband's father?" A beat of silence. Diane blinked. The smile faded, replaced by a small, confused frown. "I'm sorry?" "Your husband's father," the judge repeated, patient and flat. "His name, his occupation. Do you know it?" Diane let out a short, almost amused breath. She glanced toward Patricia before answering. A quick look, casual, like the question was barely worth the effort. "Otis," she said. "Otis Whitfield. He's some kind of contractor. Retired, I think. To be honest, I barely—" The courtroom doors opened. A man walked in. He wore dark trousers and a simple charcoal jacket over a plain shirt. Work boots, clean. He moved without hurry, the way a man moves when he has never once needed to rush to prove anything. His face was weathered and calm, with Ted's same jaw, Ted's same eyes. Otis Whitfield found a seat in the gallery without a word. But around the room, something shifted. A clerk near the side door looked up from her screen and went very still. One of the junior attorneys at a nearby table leaned toward his colleague and said something under his breath, his eyes tracking Otis across the room. Gerald Peck turned, looked, and for just a moment, one unguarded, visible moment, the easy confidence in his face went somewhere else. Judge Castellano watched all of it from the bench. "I'm going to call a brief recess," she said. Her voice was unchanged. 15 minutes. The gavel came down. Diane turned slowly in her chair toward Patricia, her brow creased, her composure showing its first crack. "What is happening?" she whispered. Patricia had no answer. Diane moved fast for a woman in heels. The moment the gavel hit, she was on her feet and cutting toward the side of the room where Vera Stills was gathering her papers. Patricia was right behind her, pearl earrings and all. Ted saw it coming. He didn't move. "Excuse me." Diane's voice was polished, but the edges were fraying. She stepped into Vera's path, close enough to make it impossible to walk around her. "I'd like to know what that was about." Vera looked up from her legal pad. She was a small woman, but she had the kind of stillness that made you feel like you were the one taking up too much space. "The recess?" Vera said. "The reaction." Diane's eyes moved toward the gallery where Otis had settled into a seat near the back. "When that man walked in, the clerk, the other attorneys," she stopped herself, recalibrated, softened her tone. "I'm just trying to understand the situation." Patricia stepped up beside her daughter. Her voice was quieter, more controlled. "We deserve some clarity, don't we?" Vera glanced once at Ted. He gave a slight nod. She set her legal pad down on the table and looked at Diane directly. "Otis Whitfield," she said, "is the sole owner of Whitfield Holdings, LLC." Diane waited. "And?" "Whitfield Holdings is the parent company behind 14 regional development projects, mixed-use complexes, residential builds, commercial properties. Several of them you've probably driven past. One of them is the Callaway Center on 5th. Vera let that sit for a second. The company has been operating for over 30 years. It is not small. Patricia's chin lifted slightly. "What does that mean in terms of—" "9 figures, Vera said. "Conservative estimate." The hallway went quiet. Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Ted has always had access to the family trust," Vera continued, her tone even and informational, like she was reading from a weather report. "He has never touched it, not once. He chose to build Whitfield Design on his own, without family backing, because that was important to him." She paused. "He's been living modestly by principle, not necessity." The color in Diane's face shifted. Something moved behind her eyes. A fast, ugly calculation, the kind a person can't hide when the numbers stop adding up the way they expected. She thought about 12 years. The small house she'd complained about. The truck Ted drove until it had 200,000 miles on it. The birthday dinner she'd cut short because the restaurant wasn't the kind of place she wanted to be seen. The way she'd introduced him at her company gala. "This is Ted. He does blueprints," like he was a hobby she'd picked up and hadn't gotten around to putting down. She thought about how many times she'd called Otis the handyman. Patricia placed a hand on Diane's arm. Diane shook it off. "Why didn't he—" She stopped. Started again. "Why would anyone—" "Because some people earn what they have," Vera said simply. Then she picked up her legal pad and walked away. Ted found his father in the hallway near the water fountain at the far end of the corridor. Otis was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking out a narrow window at the parking lot below. He turned when he heard Ted's footsteps. A small, quiet smile crossed his face. "You look good," Otis said. "You're wearing your good boots," Ted said. Otis looked down at his feet. "These are my regular boots." "I know." They stood together for a moment without saying anything. That had always been enough between them. "I want you to know," Otis said, "I didn't wait for your call." His voice was low and unhurried. "I had a feeling things weren't right before you reached out. Weeks before." He looked at Ted steadily. "I already had someone reviewing the financials, a forensic accountant, and I brought in a second attorney, Marcus Webb. He works the kind of cases that need a little more digging than a standard divorce." Ted absorbed that. "You didn't say anything. You didn't need the weight of it yet." Otis's eyes held no apology, just the steady certainty of a man who had always known exactly what he was doing. "I raised you to build things on your own. That doesn't mean I stop watching the foundation." Ted nodded once. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were calm. "Webb will be filing supplemental documentation this afternoon," Otis said. "The trust structure is clean. None of it touches the marriage. She gets nothing from my side." He paused. "What she does get, that depends on what Marcus found in your joint accounts." The way he said it, quiet, measured, unhurried, told Ted the accountant had found something. Ted didn't ask what. Not yet. There was time. "I'll tell you everything after the session," Otis said. The bailiff's voice echoed from the end of the hall, court resuming in 5 minutes. Otis squeezed Ted's shoulder once, firm and brief. Then he turned and walked back toward the courtroom doors without another word. Ted returned to the respondents' table and sat down. Across from him, Diane was already in her seat. Her back was straight, but the ease was gone from it, replaced by something rigid. The designer blazer looked the same. Everything underneath it had changed. She did not look at Ted. She stared at the front of the courtroom, and for the first time all morning, she looked like a woman who had just realized she didn't know what game she was playing. The conference room on the 14th floor of Otis's building had no art on the walls, just clean white paint, a long dark table, and a view of the city that stretched out in every direction, like something that had to be earned. Ted sat on one side. Otis sat beside him. Across the table was a small, precise man named Gerald Fitch, who worked as a forensic accountant and looked exactly like someone who spent his days inside other people's numbers. Wire-rimmed glasses, a navy suit with no tie, a stack of printed reports in front of him that he'd color-coded with small adhesive tabs. He did not ease into it. "The first thing I found," Gerald said, sliding a single page across the table, "was a company called Meridian Group Partners, LLC, registered in Delaware 14 months ago." He tapped the paper with one finger. "Your joint savings account was the source of 9 transfers, totaling just under $42,000, all marked in your household records as routine bill payments." Ted looked at the page. The numbers were clean and neat, which made them worse somehow. "There were no bills," Gerald continued. "No invoices, no vendor accounts tied to the LLC. It's a shell. Nothing inside it but a name and a bank account." He paused. "The bank account belongs to Bradley Ashford." The name landed flat in the room. Ted had seen it once before, on a text thread Diane thought was private. B. Just a letter. A shortcut. Like he was something small and easy to carry around. "She was moving money into his account," Ted said. "For over a year," Gerald confirmed. "Consistent intervals. Small enough to avoid automatic flags. The amounts varied slightly each time, which suggests someone coached her on structuring." He let that word settle. Coached. "This wasn't improvised." Otis hadn't moved. His hands were folded on the table and his face was still, but his eyes were watching his son. Ted didn't say anything right away. He looked at the page. He thought about the mornings Diane had sat across from him at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, scrolling her phone. He thought about the grocery lists, the shared calendar, the joint account she had full access to for 12 years because he had trusted her. Because trust was the whole point of it. $42,000. While she packed boxes in a storage unit and met with divorce attorneys and planned her exit, she had been quietly emptying their future into a man's account like it was nothing. "Tell him the rest," Otis said. Gerald reached for a second folder. He opened it and laid out 2 additional documents side by side. "Bradley Ashford has done this before," he said. "Twice that we've confirmed." He pointed to the left document. "A woman in Raleigh named Carol Sims. She divorced her husband in 2019. Bradley was her relationship partner during the marriage, and approximately $31,000 moved from her marital accounts into a company he'd created. She received a partial divorce settlement, and Bradley left the relationship within 30 days of the payout." He pointed to the right document. "Before that, a woman in Charlotte, Sandra Tate, 2016. Similar structure, different LLC name, same pattern." Ted stared at the 2 pages. "He finds the woman first," Gerald said, his tone completely even. "He establishes the relationship. He positions himself before the divorce filing. He helps structure the fund movement to avoid detection, receives the money into his shell company, and disappears once the settlement resolves." He looked at Ted over his glasses. "You were the third." The room was very quiet. Ted had thought this was a marriage falling apart. He had thought this was Diane choosing someone else. He had let himself believe, in the private hours when he was honest with himself, that maybe he had missed something, had been too quiet, too settled, too focused on work, while she drifted away. He understood now that he had been a target. Not a husband she'd stopped loving, a mark she had been working. "We need to contact Carol Sims," Otis said, looking at Gerald. "And Sandra Tate, if she's willing. Get corroborating statements, not for the divorce proceeding, for the criminal referral." He said it the way he said everything, calm, certain, like the decision had already been made and the words were just paperwork. Gerald nodded. "I've already drafted a preliminary contact letter for Sims. She settled quietly the first time. She may want a second chance to say something." Otis looked at Ted. Ted was looking at the 3 documents laid out in front of him. Carol, Sandra, Diane. A sequence, a system. A man who had done this before and had never once faced any consequence for it. $42,000. He thought about the storage unit, the cologne that wasn't his, the way Diane had laughed quietly with her mother in the courtroom gallery, so sure she had already won. He put his hand flat on the table and pushed himself to his feet. "I don't want to settle quietly," he said. His voice was low, no heat in it, just wait. "I want to see every piece of this in front of that judge." He looked at his father. "All of it. I want to see it through." Otis held his son's gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. The subpoenas came back on a Tuesday. Gerald Fitch spread the new documents across the same long table like he was laying out a map of somewhere Ted never wanted to visit. More color-coded tabs, more printed pages, the same quiet, precise manner that somehow made everything he said hit harder. "Patricia Combs," Gerald said, opening the first folder. Ted went still. He had expected more on Bradley. More on Diane. He had not fully braced for the name of Diane's mother to land in the middle of the table like that. "Her number appears in Diane's phone records going back 22 months, Gerald continued. The subpoena for the text message archive gave us direct content from the last 14. He slid a printed summary across the table. I flagged the relevant exchanges. Ted picked up the page. The messages had been printed in clean columns. Diane's texts on the right, Patricia's on the left. The timestamps ran down the center like a spine. The first flagged exchange was from 16 months ago. Patricia: you need to move before he starts asking questions. Once he starts looking, it gets complicated. Diane: I know. Brad says the same thing. I just want to make sure I have enough set aside first. Patricia: you will. Just keep it moving. Don't give him a reason to look closer. Ted read it twice. He set the page down on the table and looked at the window. The city spread out behind the glass, all that gray morning light sitting flat on the rooftops. Before he starts asking questions. He had never asked questions. He had trusted her. He had gone to work and drawn blueprints and paid bills from a joint account and come home to a woman who had been having a different conversation entirely, in a different room, with her mother's voice in her ear telling her to hurry. He picked the page back up and kept reading. There was an exchange from 11 months ago. Diane: Mom, do you think I should look into his family more, like what they actually have? Patricia: why bother? The man wears the same jacket every week and drives a 4-year-old truck. What are you going to find? Diane: fair point. Brad says we're fine. Patricia: Brad's right. You've already done the work. Don't overthink it. Ted read that one slowly. The man wears the same jacket every week. He thought about the flannel, about Otis showing up to family dinners in work boots, because that was who Otis was, a man who built things and didn't need anyone to know about it. Diane had looked at his father's worn jacket and seen nothing worth examining. Patricia had looked at the same thing and called it confirmation. They had made their assumptions and stopped there. They had been so certain that quiet meant empty. There was one more flagged exchange, from 9 months ago. Patricia: has he said anything about his father's business? Diane: never. I've asked a couple times over the years. He just says Otis is retired, does some contracting work here and there. Patricia: see? Nothing to worry about. You're fine, sweetheart. Just finish it. Diane: I know. I just want it done. Patricia: then get it done. You've been patient long enough. You deserve better than this. Ted put the page down. He sat very still with his hands flat on the table. The fluorescent light hummed faintly above him. Somewhere outside the room he could hear a phone ringing and a door closing, and the ordinary sound of a building going about its day, as if nothing in the world had shifted. But something had. This wasn't a wife who had drifted away and made a bad choice. This wasn't even just Diane and Bradley and a scheme they'd built together in secret. This had a history. This had voices. This had a mother sitting across a table or in a phone call or in whatever comfortable chair she used at home, and coaching her daughter on when to move and what not to look at, and how to finish it clean. You deserve better than this. 22 months of planning. While Ted had sat at his drafting table and trusted the shape of his life, the two women closest to it had been quietly drawing a different set of plans. He felt the anger come up slow and solid, the way heat rises through concrete. Not a flash, but a pressure. Deep and structural. The kind that doesn't flare out. The kind that stays. He heard Otis shift beside him. His father hadn't spoken since Gerald began. He had read the messages when they were first placed on the table, and he had been quiet ever since. The particular quiet that Ted had known his whole life, the kind that meant Otis was measuring something. A hand came down on Ted's shoulder, firm, steady. Ted. Otis's voice was low. You've seen enough of what they did. He gave his son's shoulder one slow, deliberate press. It's time to stop reacting to it. It's time to finish this properly. In court. Ted looked at his father. Then he looked back down at Patricia's words on the page. He took a breath. He nodded once. The conference room felt different this time. Same long table, same folders, same city view behind the glass. But the energy in the room had changed. It wasn't the tight, careful energy of men piecing together a disaster. It was something else, calmer, more deliberate, like a door being locked from the inside. Ted arrived first. He poured himself a coffee from the side table and stood near the window while the others filed in. Gerald Fitch came in next, carrying a thick accordion file under one arm. Then Otis, unhurried in his flannel jacket, setting a worn leather folio on the table like he'd been attending these meetings his whole life. Because he had. Behind him came Rachel Voss, the forensic accountant, with her laptop and a neat stack of printed reports, bound with black clips. Gerald closed the door. "Let's go through it from the top," he said, settling into his chair. He opened the accordion file and pulled out a single clean document. He slid it to the center of the table. "The trust," he said. Ted looked at it. He had seen versions of it before. His father had explained the basics years ago, in the way Otis explained most things, plainly, without ceremony, making sure Ted understood without making it a performance. "Walk us through the key point," Otis said. Not because he didn't know it, because he wanted Ted to hear it clearly, out loud, one final time before they walked into that courtroom. Gerald nodded. Otis structured Ted's involvement in Whitfield Holdings through a discretionary trust. Ted is a named beneficiary, but he holds no direct ownership. He cannot instruct distributions. He cannot sign on behalf of the trust. Under state law, that means the trust assets are entirely separate property. He tapped the page. They are not marital property. They were never marital property. Diane's claim to any portion of Whitfield Holdings is legally baseless. It was baseless from the moment her attorney filed it. The room was quiet for a second. Ted thought about Diane and Patricia sitting in that courtroom 2 weeks ago, laughing quietly, so certain they had mapped the full shape of his life and found it small. They hadn't even looked in the right direction. "And the Shell LLC?" Ted asked. Rachel opened her laptop and turned it so the table could see the screen. A chart filled the display. Dates, transfers, amounts, account names. Clean lines connecting everything. 17 months of transfers, she said. 31 separate transactions, totaling just under $240,000 in marital funds, moved into the LLC Bradley Ashford controls. She scrolled down. "We also have banking records from his 2 prior fraud cases. The structure is nearly identical. Same type of LLC, same transfer timing, different women, same playbook." She pulled a printed page from her stack and passed it to Gerald. "One of the prior victims has agreed to provide a written statement. Her attorney signed off this morning." Ted didn't say anything. He just looked at the numbers on the screen. $240,000, moved in careful pieces, a little at a time, so that no single transaction looked like anything more than a rounding error. Patient, practiced. Bradley had done this before, and he'd gotten better at it each time. Ted thought about Bradley's face, the easy smile he'd seen once at a firm event Diane had brought him to, introduced as a colleague. The relaxed handshake. The kind of man who knew exactly how to make himself seem harmless. "Patricia's messages go into the filing as well?" Ted asked. "Everything goes in," Gerald confirmed. "The text archive, the timeline we built from the exchanges, the accountant's report, and the prior victim's statement. We're submitting the full package." Ted sat with that for a moment. Then he looked up. "I want to be the one to speak to Diane directly," he said. "In the courtroom, not everything through the attorneys." He kept his voice even. I want her to hear it from me." Gerald looked at Otis briefly, then back at Ted. Otis spoke first. "That's your call to make," he said simply. Not cautious, not discouraging, just clean acknowledgement, the way his father had always given it. "You've earned that." Gerald nodded slowly. "We can build that into the structure of the hearing. There's a point where a direct statement from you will carry more weight than anything I could read into the record." He paused. "It needs to be controlled, precise, no anger showing." "There won't be," Ted said. He meant it. The anger was still there. He wasn't fooling himself about that. But it had settled into something he could carry without it spilling. It had become useful. It had become fuel for something specific, not a fire he needed to put out. Gerald gathered the documents back into the file, neat and final. "The hearing is confirmed," he said, closing the accordion flap. 7 days from today." 7 days. Ted pushed back from the table and stood. He picked up his coffee cup, drank the last of it cold, and set it down on the side table near the window. Outside, the city was going about its ordinary morning. Traffic moving, people walking, the sky flat and white and entirely indifferent. Ted felt the steadiness in his chest, quiet and solid. He hadn't felt it in months. He reached for his coat. The courtroom looked the same as it had weeks ago. Same pale walls, same wooden benches, same low hum of the building's air system moving through the ceiling vents. But the people in it were different now. Something had shifted in every face in the room. And it had shifted weeks ago, the moment Otis Whitfield walked through those doors, and the clerks stood a little straighter. Ted arrived early. He and Gerald took their seats at the left table, setting folders down quietly. No rushing, no shuffling. Otis settled into the gallery directly behind Ted, 1 row back, close enough that Ted could feel his presence without turning around. Diane and Patricia came in 7 minutes later. Ted noticed it immediately. The difference was small but real. Diane was still dressed well, a slate-gray blazer, her hair neat, but the ease was gone. The week before the first hearing, she had moved through rooms like someone who already knew how things would end. Today she moved like someone watching her step. Patricia was beside her, chin up, posture stiff, wearing the performance of confidence the way someone wears a coat that no longer fits. They sat at the right table across from Ted and Gerald. Diane's attorney, a man named Crowell, spread his folders open and exchanged a few quiet words with her. Diane nodded without really listening. She didn't look at Ted. Ted looked straight ahead. Judge Castellano entered, and the room stood. She settled at the bench, opened the case file, and let the room sit down without fanfare. "We're back on the record," she said. "Case number 2024 DR 1147, Whitfield versus Whitfield." She looked at both tables. "Mr. Gerald Fitch, your client has submitted supplemental documentation to the court. We'll begin there." Gerald rose. "Thank you, Your Honor." He opened the accordion file and removed the trust documentation, clean, bound, properly tabbed. He handed a copy across to Crowell and approached the bench with the original. "What the court has in front of it," Gerald said, returning to his place, "is the complete structure of Whitfield Holdings' discretionary trust, executed 17 years ago and amended once in 2019. My client, Theodore Whitfield, is named as a discretionary beneficiary. He holds 0 direct ownership interest. He has no signing authority. He cannot direct, instruct, or compel distributions. This is not a recent arrangement." He paused. "It predates this marriage by 9 years." Judge Castellano turned pages slowly. Her eyes moved down each one with the flat focus of someone who read documents like this the way other people read newspapers, practiced, quick, missing nothing. The room was quiet, except for the turning of paper. Crowell leaned close to Diane and whispered something. Diane's jaw tightened. Patricia, seated directly behind her in the gallery, leaned forward and pressed 2 fingers to Diane's shoulder. Some kind of signal, some coded encouragement. Diane didn't react. The judge set down the last page. "The trust structure is clear," she said. "Mr. Crowell, your client's request to include Whitfield Holdings assets in the marital estate, is that still your position?" Crowell stood. He was a smooth man, practiced at staying composed. "Your Honor, we'd argue that while the formal structure predates the marriage, Mr. Whitfield's ongoing benefit from the trust during the marriage constitutes an indirect marital contribution that—" "Counsel!" The judge's voice was flat, not sharp, just final. "The trust is discretionary. No distributions were made during the marriage. The beneficiary took no income from it. There is no indirect benefit to calculate." She set her pen down. "That argument is overruled." The sound of Patricia's breath, sharp and audible, carried from the gallery. Diane's hand moved under the table. Ted caught it in his peripheral vision, fingers pressing flat against her thigh, the knuckle going white. She had spent months building a picture in her head. A picture of herself walking out of this courtroom with the house, the accounts, a cut of his firm's earnings. She had let herself believe it so completely, had laughed about it quietly with her mother in that same gallery 3 weeks ago, that the picture had stopped being a plan. It had become a certainty. Now the judge had just told her it was nothing, that the thing she had been reaching for had never been reachable, that she hadn't even known where to look. Patricia's hand came to Diane's shoulder again, and this time she bent close, whispering fast and low. Diane gave a small, tight shake of her head. Whatever Patricia was saying, there was nothing in it that could help now. The trust was airtight. The judge had seen it in under 10 minutes. The fortune Diane had assumed was hers to take had never belonged to the marriage at all. Judge Castellano made a note on her legal pad. "We'll move forward," she said. "The marital asset claims related to Whitfield Holdings are dismissed." She looked up and leveled her gaze on the room without particular expression. "There is additional financial evidence submitted by the petitioner. Mr. Fitch, your team is prepared to present?" Gerald was already on his feet. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "We are?" Gerald set a second-bound folder on the table. This one was thicker. No neat tabs. Just facts, stacked in order, each page dated and sourced. The kind of document that didn't need presentation tricks to land hard. "Your Honor," Gerald said, "I'd like to introduce into evidence the full report compiled by forensic accountant Marcus Webb, retained to review the financial activity of the marital estate over the past 36 months. He slid a copy to Crowell, who accepted it with the careful stillness of a man who had already heard too much to pretend he wasn't worried. Crowell whispered something to Diane. She didn't look up. "Mr. Webb's findings," Gerald continued, moving to the center of the room, "document the systematic transfer of marital funds, totaling just over $41,000, into a limited liability company registered in Nevada under the name Ashford Capital Solutions. The LLC was formed 14 months ago." He paused. "It has no business operations, no clients, no revenue. It is a vessel. Nothing more." The room was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Tighter. "The managing member of Ashford Capital Solutions," Gerald said, "is Bradley Ashford." Ted didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He heard it. A small, quick shift of weight from the gallery behind the right table. A creak of a bench, someone adjusting too fast. Gerald continued. "Mr. Ashford is not a licensed real estate investor. He holds no active business registrations in this state or in Nevada. What our investigation did uncover is a pattern." He moved back to the folder and removed a separate sheet. In 2019, a woman named Karen Hollis filed a civil complaint in Fayette County, alleging Bradley Ashford had diverted funds from a shared account into a shell entity during their relationship. The case was settled privately. he let that land. In 2021, a second woman, Sandra Pruitt, filed a similar complaint in this same county. That case was dismissed when Ms. Pruitt's attorney withdrew without explanation. Gerald looked up. Ms. Pruitt is present in this courtroom today. A woman in the left side of the gallery stood. She was in her early 40s, her posture steady, her expression flat and practiced, the look of someone who had already made peace with what it cost her to be here. She gave a single nod to the judge and sat back down. Diane's head turned. For the first time, she looked toward the gallery behind her own table. She found Bradley's face. He was sitting near the end of the third row. His collar was damp. His jaw was tight, eyes moving between the door and the floor, and he looked nothing like the man who had walked into rooms like he owned them. He looked cornered. Judge Castellano studied Ms. Pruitt for a moment, then wrote something down. Gerald set a third document on the table. Finally, Your Honor, text message records subpoenaed from Patricia Combs's mobile carrier. He handed the sheet across to Crowell, who barely looked at it. In a message dated 11 months ago, Ms. Combs instructed her daughter, and I'm quoting directly, "File before he starts asking questions. His family is nothing to worry about. Move fast." Gerald's voice stayed even. 3 months later, the first transfer into Ashford Capital Solutions was made. Patricia's chin dropped half an inch, just half, but Ted caught it from where he sat. Then Gerald paused, and Ted stood up. Gerald stepped back, giving him room without being asked. Ted turned to face Diane directly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room was silent enough that a normal speaking voice carried everywhere. "I found the bank statement in your coat pocket," he said. 11 weeks ago, a Thursday." Diane stared at him. "I knew about Bradley 2 days later. I knew about the storage unit the week after that." He kept his voice steady and clear, the way he spoke when he was reviewing a structural problem with a client. No heat, just precision. "I sat across from you at dinner for 11 weeks, and I let you think you were still in control of this. I let you plan. I let you celebrate." He held her gaze. "I wanted you to walk into this courtroom completely sure you'd won." Diane's mouth opened slightly. She said nothing. Behind her, Bradley stood abruptly, pushing past the knee of the person beside him and moving toward the aisle. Gerald's voice went up immediately. "Your Honor, we'd ask that." "Bailiff." Judge Castellano's voice cut through the room like a blade. The bailiff moved to intercept Bradley at the gallery door before he reached it. Bradley's hand hit the door handle and found resistance. Through the narrow window, the shape of a uniformed officer was already visible, standing just outside in the corridor, arms at his sides, waiting with the particular stillness of someone who had been waiting for a while. Bradley stopped. His hand dropped from the handle. He let the bailiff take him by the arm. The door didn't open. Judge Castellano brought the gavel down once, clean and hard. "We'll take a 30-minute recess before final rulings." The sound echoed off the walls. Patricia's hand found the back of Diane's chair. Crowell was already closing folders, eyes down. Diane hadn't moved. She was still looking at Ted, the way someone looks at a stranger whose face they realize they should have learned a long time ago and never did. Judge Castellano returned from recess without ceremony. She sat. She opened her folder. She read. No theatrics, no long pause for effect. Just a woman who had done this job for 20 years and understood that the truth didn't need help arriving. "Regarding the marital estate," she said, her voice filling the room evenly, "the court finds that all assets connected to Whitfield Holdings and its subsidiary entities are held within a discretionary trust predating the marriage by more than 3 decades. These assets have never constituted marital property under the law. Mrs. Whitfield's claim to any portion of said trust, or any asset derived from it, is denied in full. Crowell wrote something on his legal pad. He didn't show it to Diane. Regarding the diverted marital funds, Judge Castellano continued, totaling $41,216, the court orders full restitution to the marital estate, payable by Mrs. Whitfield within 90 days of this ruling. Diane's hand, resting on the table, pressed flat against the surface. Furthermore, given the evidence presented regarding the Shell LLC and the coordinated nature of the fund transfers, this court is referring the matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential fraud charges. The judge looked up from her papers and scanned the room once, not dramatically, just the practiced sweep of someone confirming everyone in it understood her. That referral includes all parties whose names appear in the documentation submitted today. Patricia made a sound from the gallery, barely audible, the sound of a word that didn't make it out. Judge Castellano signed the bottom of the ruling page. She closed the folder. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. The referral became public record 3 weeks later. Diane's employer, a regional marketing firm with a reputation it had spent 15 years building, had an ethics clause buried on page 4 of every senior contract. Most employees never read it. Diane had signed it 6 years ago without pausing on that paragraph. She was called into HR on a Tuesday morning. She was walked out by end of business. Her badge was collected at the front desk by a young woman she had supervised for 2 years, who kept her expression professional and her eyes forward. Bradley's arrest came the following month. Karen Hollis and Sandra Pruitt had already filed corroborating complaints by then. A third woman, someone from a city 3 hours north that no one had uncovered yet, came forward after reading the court record. The pattern was impossible to argue around. Bradley's attorney entered a not guilty plea, but the paperwork told a story that didn't need a jury to follow. He made bail. He moved into a motel off the interstate. The rooms he used to walk into like he owned them stopped welcoming him back. Patricia's collapse was quieter, but it went deeper. It didn't happen online. There were no posts, no comments, no viral moments. It happened the way most real damage happens, one conversation at a time, in living rooms and church parking lots, and over lunch at the kind of restaurants where the tables are close enough to hear everything. A woman from her book club called first. Then her neighbor of 12 years didn't wave from the driveway anymore. Then the invitations stopped arriving. The charity luncheon, the spring fundraiser, the birthday dinner she had attended every year for a decade. Nobody announced anything. Nobody made a scene. They just quietly rearranged their lives, so Patricia wasn't in them. She called Diane to tell her she'd handled everything wrong, that if she had moved more carefully, thought it through better, they wouldn't be in this position. Diane stopped answering after the third call. She was living in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city by then, a plain building with thin walls and a parking lot that flooded when it rained. She was working intake at a property management office, answering phones and filing lease agreements. The work was not difficult. It gave her time to think. She had more time to think than she wanted. Ted expanded his firm quietly, not loudly, not with a ribbon cutting or a press release. He hired 2 additional architects, both young, both sharp, and moved into a larger office space 3 blocks from his original one. Otis provided backing the same way he had always provided everything, with patience, without strings, and without making it feel like a rescue. He also accepted a mentorship role at Whitfield Holdings. Not a title. Not a corner office. A standing Tuesday morning meeting where he reviewed development plans and offered input, learning the shape of his father's legacy from the inside rather than the outside, on his own schedule and his own terms. It fit him the way the right structure always fits, like it had been waiting for him to be ready for it. A year after the final gavel, Ted sat across from Otis at a small restaurant they both liked, the kind of place with no dress code and food that didn't need to prove anything. The conversation had been easy all evening. Work. A project Ted was proud of. A story Otis told about the early days of Whitfield Holdings that Ted had never heard before. Something involving a broken concrete mixer and a deadline that should have been impossible. They were finishing the last of the meal when Otis picked up his glass. He held it up, not high, just enough, and looked at his son across the table with the quiet certainty of a man who had never once doubted how this would end. "Patience," Otis said, "was never weakness, son. It was the plan all along." Ted smiled, not the careful, controlled expression he had worn in that courtroom for 11 weeks. Something easier than that. Something that had been waiting a long time to come back. He picked up his own glass and met his father's. "I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like."